today than I thought there would be. And only because I was privileged enough last Wednesday to view Dane's presentation. I never knew, but nor did I care, what Noah stood for. And I have to tell you, after watching the slide presentation, I not only learned a lot, I had a greater appreciation for a very important entity called Noah. So I'm glad you're here, and don't be surprised if you can't absorb it all. I can let you know at the very end, there's a very cute text that says questions. You will have at least one question. And in the meantime, we're going to invite Sherry up. I also want to thank you very, very much for lunch today.
We'll see if it's edible.
Okay. So we're going to
Okay. How many have ever sung Love Divine on the selling? You know, everybody.
Two different tunes to this one.
Pardon?
Yeah, this one has an alternative tune that you
Oh,
can
it
sing
does,
it
doesn't
to.
it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sing the other one for us?
No?
That's the other one.
It's Beethoven's Ode to Joy.
Oh, I love
Yeah. It's the other tune. Yeah.
That's a rainbow song. I knew that.
Okay. And Patty. Patty is going to provide our morning devotion, please.
Good morning, everybody. I had a real hard time choosing what I wanted to say this morning, and Megan gave me a couple selections. And ultimately, I use either one of them. I found one in a book that I bought to give to a friend. And then I got into this book and I kept it. So I really like it. It's a simple verse, very simple, but it's by someone whom I dearly love, and that is Mother Teresa. And because it's February, it's Valentine's, so it's about love. Do not think that love, in order to be genuine, has to be extraordinary. What we need is to love without getting tired. How does a lamp burn? Though the continuous through the continuous input of small drops of oil. If the drops of oil run out, the light of the lamp will cease and the bridegroom will say, I do not know you. And that's Matthew 25:12. My daughter, what are these drops in our lamps? They are the small things of daily life, faithfulness, punctuality, small words of kindness, a thought for others, our way of being silent, of looking, of speaking, and of acting. These are the true drops of love. Be faithful in small things because it is in them that your strength lies. And then I have just a small one, short one, also by Mother Teresa. Spread love everywhere you go. Let no one ever come to you without leaving happier. Thank you.
And now I was gonna say, where are you? Thanks to Brian, he'll be providing the background, I guess we could say, for Dane's presentation on Noah. So please come forth and tax everybody's brain like you did mine last Wednesday.
I hope it doesn't tax brains. Well, good morning. I think everybody knows who I am.
Can you use the mic, please?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and in particular the commissioned officers that are assigned to NOAA. You probably weren't aware of this, most people aren't, that NOAA is part of the Department of Commerce, and they have their own little navy in there. There actually are, about 300 commissioned officers. So I'll be talking both about the NOAA program and what these officers do in the NOAA program. So first off, we'll go through a little history, the origin of the NOAA Corps, how it came to be in existence, and then we'll talk about the functional components of NOAA and the activities that the officers have with it. So let's get started by identifying this. What you see here are the emblems for 8 uniformed services. Now, I'm stuck on 5, but it's actually 6 of these uniformed services are also military services. And those are the ones you can name off the top of your head: the Army, the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force, and the Space Service. That one I have trouble remembering. The other 2 are the Public Health Service and the NOAA Corps. These 2 agencies, or these 2 groups, only have commissioned officers in them. There's no enlisted corps. And the sizes of the commissioned corps are quite different. As you can see, the largest group is the Army, and they have 75,000 commissioned officers. These are round numbers in the Army. And as you look down the list, descending, you can see the numbers get smaller as the group gets smaller. And then you get down to the bottom, and yes, there are only 300 commissioned officers in the NOAA Corps. That's probably why you've never heard of it. By the way, in this presentation, I tried to make it a little more interesting, some pictures in here, so that you'll get a better idea about what the Corps does. This ship here is actually the NOAA Ship Researcher. This is one that I was assigned to for one assignment. Okay, so now we're going to get into the origins of it. Where did this start? Well, it started back in 1807 when Thomas Jefferson signed some legislation to survey the coast. 1807 is not very long after the United States became a country, and they figured out pretty quickly that if they were going to survive, they needed to have commerce. That means ships going in and out of harbors. Well, there weren't any charts. I shouldn't say there weren't any charts. There were charts, they were hand-drawn charts, and the people that owned them were very protective of them. So it made it dangerous to go in and out of some of the harbors. So Jefferson decided what we're going to do is we're going to go out, we're going to survey the harbors, and he created legislation to do that. And this would provide topographic maps of shoreline hydrographic surveys to get the depth of the water and create charts. This was made up of civilians that were led by Army and Navy officers. And the Army obviously were doing the surveying on the ground, and the naval officers were doing the hydrography in the water. It worked out very well. They created charts, and in 1832 they formally established this as its own entity, separate from the Army, and called it the U.S. Coast Survey. During the Civil War, these officers were pulled out to go back to their regular duties. Almost all of them were. I think there were a couple of naval officers that stayed behind. And so their duties were assumed by the civilians that were there. In 1871, with the history, there was extra land that was acquired by the United States and that had never been surveyed. And so this was added to the Coast Survey's responsibilities, geodesy, the study of the geo, creating maps. And so the outfit was renamed the U.S. Coastal Geodetic Survey. Some of you are probably old enough to remember that. It may ring a bell. As time went on, in 1898, there was another war, Spanish-American War. The officers were pulled out again for that. And after that, none of them came back. And so the civilians that were there, who had been wearing uniforms and keeping military discipline all this time, took over leading the field crews. So we're going to move on to 1917. Now, as you can see, wars play a part in all this. In 1917, with the World War, it became obvious that there were not charts of the foreign countries that the United States was going to have to go to. C&GS only did domestic charts. So they wanted to transfer the ships and the topography capability surveyors from C&GS to the military. In order to do that and make it smooth for operations, it was very convenient to give these fellows commissions, which are done, with a signature by the president. So, and it was very easy because they were already wearing uniforms. They already were used to that kind of discipline. So they made the transfer into the Army and the Navy very smooth. Everybody knew rank-wise where they stood. That was a primary reason to make it easy to move it. But the other reason, a very real one, was that if they were not commissioned officers and they were captured, they could be tried as spies. And that would, not be a good thing for them. So now we have a commission corps created, and it's in C&GS. We're up to that. Let's break off for a minute and let me show you, talk about some of these pictures. This over here is a schematic of this camera. This is a camera for aerial photography. It is a lot larger than it looks in that picture. The film that goes in here is 12 inches wide. And these pictures take 12 by 12 shots on a roll, and they're timed so that they're overlap 90% to create stereo photography. And we'll talk about that a little more later. This film cassette weighs about 25 pounds. And when you have to change the film, you have to go in a totally black room or put it in a black bag and do everything by touch. It's not that hard once you get used to it. I wanted to show you this picture here. This is old, obviously, but it was the shoreline depiction of this same harbor. And you can see they're radically different. And so the surveys that are done, when you start out with aerial photography, you have a much better idea where you're going with the chart. This is a PBY, and it was after the war, one of the aircraft that was used to do aerial photography. During World War II, half of C&GS officers were assigned to the Army and the Navy, creating charts. I like this quote from Admiral Nimitz that the Pathfinder created close to 100 million charts and paved the way for the road to Tokyo. This is the pathfinder here. Unfortunately, it was lost in a storm off Batana. And these are other photos of ships of that time. So we're still on the origins of the NOAA Corps, and after World War II, the ships and the officers that were put into the Navy were returned to the Department of Commerce, and they went back to making charts. So I wanted to show you a couple things here. We see these two fellows with sextants, and they're measuring angles, but if you know anything about sextants, you usually hold them up and down because you're measuring the angle between the star and the horizon. And they're holding it sideways. So what they're doing is measuring the angle between 2 points on shore. And this is what it looks like when you're looking through the telescope. You line them up, one exactly over the other. And when you have two people doing it and the center object is the same, you end up with two angles. And you can use a 3-arm protractor to put those angles in, and then you can fit it to those three objects and get your position. And that's used a lot when there is no electronic navigation available. That kind of technique. We got, it's kind of cut off here, but what we got is somebody here with what's called a lead line, and that's used, was used to do soundings. We'll look at that again a little later. So back to the origins of the Corps. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson combined the Weather Service with C&GS and called it the Environmental Science Services Administration, or ESSA. And the idea was that these were things that were related to commerce and had an environmental impact. And this organization lasted for 5 years before there was another reorganization. This device here is an interesting device. Let's see if we can look at it a little closer. That is tide prediction machine number 2. And it was put in service in 1912. Tide prediction machine number 1 was put in service in 1893 in Europe. And so this is a very interesting device. It sat at the entrance to the headquarters in Silver Springs for the National Ocean Survey for years. I used to walk by it. It predicts tide level, height of the water. Inputs are put in manually here with gears and levers, and they address those things that tell the tide what level to be. Primarily the position of the sun and the moon. Of course, you need the time, the latitude and the longitude to predict it, and some geographic factors. If something is further inland, then the tide is going to be affected. So it's put together, and then this hand crank here is turned, and all this is actually solving partial differential equations, and is put out there, and that shows the height of the tide at a particular time. This thing actually went out of service in the early 1980s, and was accurate to within a half a foot. And it's an amazing device. Obviously, the computers do all the work now, and it's more accurate. Instead of half a foot, it's 1/10 of a foot. But this thing it's in the Smithsonian Museum now. Oh, it weighs 2,500 pounds, just including it. Okay, so in 1970, 5 years after ESSA was created, there was another reorganization that Richard Nixon did. What that was to combine all the environmental sciences agencies that were out there into one group with an umbrella agency called NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And that's where NOAA came from. Its purpose was for better protection of life and property from natural hazards, better understanding of the environment, and exploration and development leading to intelligent use of our marine resources. we're back to Thomas Jefferson's view of commerce. So it really does make sense for this agency and the things that are in it to be located in the Department of Commerce. When that happened, the size of the Corps was increased to 300. It was filled, actually there's an authorized strength of 500, but the funding is not there. And maybe someday they will. Okay, we'll take a break from that for a second. Look at some of these pictures. I showed you a picture earlier of a guy, I said that's a lead line survey. Well, here's another picture. This thing here is a lead line. What it is a piece of lead with a hollow part in it with tallow on the bottom attached to a line. And oops, wrong way. And so as the ship moves slowly forward, this bosun mate slings it out ahead of the ship, lets the line out, so it goes to the bottom, and when the line is up and down, straight up and down, they pull it out and they can measure how deep the water is. So that's the first way of, first kind of hydrography to figure out depth. Well, that improved with these devices, echo sounders. It's a more complex device. It has a pinger that sends a noise down, and when it bounces back, the time interval can be used to calculate how deep the water is. Obviously, that's better. Today, there are multi-beam sounders. So rather than a single ping, there are mini pings. In this picture here, it gives you an idea of what the difference is. When you're doing lead line, you're getting 1 point. So you can see what the slope of the bottom is. I mean, you can interpolate it. When you have an echo sounder, you actually can see exactly what the slope of the bottom is. So it's more accurate. With multi-beam, you see a large area. And this picture here demonstrates that these two techniques totally missed this reef that was in between the lines. They were using them for deep water initially, and to be honest with you, I'm not sure if they're using them in shallow water. That's a very noisy technique. There were funding issues with that at the time. So that's the origin of the NOAA Corps. So now what we're going to do is jump over to talk about the components of NOAA and where the officers are and what they're doing. I have a list here of the line offices that NOAA has. And you can see here, these are the number of offices that are assigned in them. The Office of Marine and Aviation Operations is the organization that schedules and maintains aircraft and ships and puts the officers on them to run them. That's why the bulk of the people are here. National Ocean Survey is the agency that's responsible for making the charts, and these are the people that do the administrative work there. The National Marine Fisheries is an organization we'll talk about quite a bit that has to do with, that manages commercial fishing. Weather Service, we've all had experience with that. And then this Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, OAR, is the oceanographic research arm. And these fellows here maintain the environmental satellites and manage the data and routing it to where it goes. It's also worth noting that the current leader of NOAA is actually a NOAA Corps officer. This is the first time that's happened since NOAA was created. This is Vice Admiral Nancy Hahn. She joined NOAA out of school, has a technical degree, had many assignments in NOAA and across all these line components. And so she was in a position to understand how to balance things work. Just as an aside for some numbers, the NOAA budget is around $6 billion for everything. And most of this is the Weather Service, 30–40% probably of the money is the Weather Service, and they have the most total number of people assigned, around 3,000. The National Ocean Survey and the National Marine Fisheries Service are running about 20% of the budget, each. And the other components trickle down to 10% and less of the budget. So the bulk of the money is being spent by the Weather Service, followed up by the National Ocean Survey and the National Marine Fisheries Service. So the director of the NOAA Corps, who is also a commissioned officer, obviously, also is the director of the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, who maintain and operate the aircraft. Currently, they have 10 aircraft and 15 ships. They also have other duties. There's a NOAA diving program that, and a small boat program that manages the people that are involved with that. This is a hydrographic launch. When hydrographic surveys are done, typically a larger ship goes to the general area and smaller launches are put in the water, and they're the ones that actually do the measurement. These are the aircraft. This is past, present, and future, actually. This is the one that you probably have heard about. These are the aircraft that fly into hurricanes. It's a P-3 Orion. And these have been, there's two of them. They've been named. One is Miss Piggy, and the other one is named Kermit. But they've been in service since 1977, and that's a lot of time when you're flying in hurricanes. They've been authorized and will be replaced with these C-130 Hercules. They aren't replaced yet. I think this first one is going to come online next year. The other Weather Service aircraft is this Gulfstream. While this one flies at lower altitudes, 5,000 feet or lower, this one flies at very high altitudes. I think the ceiling is like 50,000 feet. It drops devices through the hurricane, which measures wind speed, temperature, direction, and that sort of thing. And that, combined with the data that from the hurricane itself, goes to the National Hurricane Center, where they can predict the strength, the direction, and what kind of damage is going to be done when this thing makes landfall. These other aircraft have various jobs. This is a Twin Otter that's used almost exclusively by the Fisheries Service for marine mammal surveys. These two aircraft, this is a King Air and this is a Aero Commander 690, Turbo Commander, are used for photography. And although there are overlapping missions. This one is a smaller one. This is the one that I flew. And it does updates of VFR charts, visual flight rules, and works on the snow survey program, which we'll talk about. These are where they're maintained. The ships are spread out, when I was in NOAA Corps, they were two main marine centers where the ships were maintained. Now they're spread out to be closer to the places where they work. So that's the Office of Aircraft and Marine Operations. This is NOS. These are the people that make the charts. They also have other activities, the tide and current measurements, which we talked about when we looked at the machine number 2, and these other activities that are associated with shipboard surveys. Here's another picture of a hydrographic launch. These pictures here show some of the things that are going on in NOS. This is the inside of one of the aircraft, I think the King Air. These are cameras that are used to get the coastline. The pictures I mentioned have a 90% overlap, so they can be viewed on a stereoscope, one picture in one eye and the other picture in the other. The 90% overlap, you can actually bring the 2 points, the same point, one with each eye, together, and use that to use the difference in elevation as you move across the photography. The devices, that we're using now are a lot more automated. This is a manual one, but you get a better feel for what it looks like. It's tied to the ground, in other words, the geographic position, by points that are surveyed in the field, and they're marked with a great big X that you can actually see in the photography from 30,000 feet. So when you're looking at it, you can look at the photography and see this is exactly that point, and then when you trace the shoreline and get the elevation, it's tied to the earth, so that when you currently use electronic navigation, that everything's going to agree. These things here also can be used for these survey markers, which you may have seen. That's a very expanded picture. They're about that big. And they're throughout the entire United States, and they're used by commercial people for what I can't find the right word, to see where your land is, you know, for that. Here's another hydro launch, and this is a oceanographic effort. These charts. Here's a couple examples of them. You can see they have the depth and the waterways, the channels, and that sort of thing that mariners can use when they're, particularly commercial ships, going in and out of harbors. Nowadays, these charts are rarely used in the commercial. They all use these digital chart plotters. Although they are required to have the charts on board in case there's no power and you can't turn on your computer. There used to be a 5-color press in the basement of the Department of Commerce where they printed these charts. That's gone. And if you wanted to get a paper chart now, you go to someplace like West Marine and you ask for the chart you want, and they'll print it for you right there. Print on demand. Cut a lot of expenses, and also reshuffled where the expense was. If you have a chart, for example, in Alaska, in an area that is not used very much, and you send a crew up there to create the chart, it's expensive. Now, if you have a chart that's down on the East Coast, and you print a bazillion of them, you can recover your money. But if you're only selling 10 or 15 charts a year, it's economically, difficult. So this print on demand was a really good way to go at that problem. I also wanted to show you some pictures. This is what you can see with multi-beam. Obviously you get a much better idea of what's down there when you're using that. That's much better than one of these techniques here, which we don't use anymore, which is called wire drag. These two boats have a wire suspended between them that's held at a constant depth by these buoys, and it's weighted. And they move down a channel, and so they know if it doesn't snag anything, that the channel is clear to that depth. If it does snag something, then what happens is the divers go over the side, go down the wire, and go figure out what it is it's snagged on. Which isn't fun, because in all harbors, the visibility is about that much. So you have to feel your way down, and then you have to figure out what this thing is. Not something I want to do. I talked about tide gauges and the machine number 2. They also have to be calibrated to field observations. In order to do that, there are these tide gauges that are installed on piers. And what the tide gauge is a float. It's inside a large fiberglass tube now, which is almost 2 feet in diameter. It's very large. And can be 20 feet long. And as the tides come in and out, this float goes up and down, and it's recorded here on, you can't see it very well because it's blocked off, a paper tape. So that you can measure exactly what the tide was and use it to calibrate your models currently, computer models. These things are still in effect. They're all automated now, so the paper tape and that sort of thing is gone. But this is a very important part of making a chart. I had to install one of these one time. That was a bear. This thing was 20 feet long. It took 2 guys to carry it, and it had to be bolted onto the pier. The top wasn't too bad, and the bottom underwater wasn't too bad, but right in the middle where the tide was going up and down was terrible. Because one minute you're hanging on this thing, and the next minute you're underwater. It was quite an experience. Also, I guess, here's a couple of photos of people in the field, and you'll notice some of these people are standing in the water. So you just wonder, why are they doing that? The reason is twofold. One of them is that in order to get good positions, you have known objects on land. To get good angles, that's the only place you can get it from. Because if you have a very narrow angle, the chance for error is much greater. The other one is when they go out on a hydrographic survey, they bring maps with them that are printed in the office from known data. And when they get out there, they find out that what they knew was pretty wrong, because where they thought was on land is now underwater, which is why they're out there to begin with. Okay, that's all for NOS. We're going to go over to the Fishery Service. I spent some time there. The primary purpose of NMFS, and probably some people might argue with me, is sustainable fisheries. That means making sure that the fish stocks that are commercially important stay healthy. And these other things, for the most part, back up that requirement. Stock assessments that are made, and habitat conservation. Bycatch reduction, which means when you're fishing and you catch something more than the target you want, then you're killing this other thing, which might be important to another fisheries. Here's a couple slides, I think, that we're going to get a little closer. This is statistics for catch, how many landings, they call it. And you'll see here in 2013, there were 9.9 billion pounds of landings for these species. Now I come over here to 2020, 7 years later, and it's less. Okay, why is that? What happened? And what happened here is the fishery stocks are not immune to environmental things that change, and sometimes they're fished harder than others. And so what we have here are allowable catches that were assigned, and you can see the allowable ones were adjusted. And they did that on the basis of the surveys that were done of the fish to see how healthy the stock was. They also, endangered species is another program. Back in the 70s, there was you may remember, there was a lot of concern about sea turtles getting caught in shrimp nets, and they would haul the net for hours, and the turtle would die, would drown, basically. So there was a program that was initiated to say, well, how can we build a net that the turtle can get out of, but the fish stay in? And so we did a lot of work, we being NOAA, with different devices attached to the net that would allow the turtle to come out. This is it's called an otter trawl. These boards are actually of the size of a very large door, and it's towed behind a shrimp boat or a fishing boat. The door is spread out, and the floats open up the net, and weights hold it down. This is I spent some time on this. This is the George M. Bowers. It's a 75-foot shrimp boat, instantly recognizable as the only shrimp boat that has a crow's nest. They don't, it's not in service anymore. I didn't actually get to dive on these. We had a sled with an elevator on it, and we tow it behind the boat and pile on the sled and dive down to the net. It was fun. The water was clear, you could see what you were doing. Marine mammal surveys, this is the same twin otter you looked at earlier. These go out and actually count whales and porpoise along with shore-based people to get an idea of how healthy that is. Also, this fellow here is an observer. Fishery Service puts observers on all the commercial fishing boats, and their job is to make sure that they're catching what they're supposed to catch, and they're not catching more than they're supposed to catch. Pretty important job. The foreign fishing fleet sometimes doesn't like it, but That's what it is. This is a very busy slide, and I apologize for that. But the Weather Service has, to me, a confusing organization until you step back from it and look at it. There's a headquarters office in Silver Spring. There are 6 regional offices which report to headquarters, and then there are 122 weather forecast offices that report to one of these 6 regional offices. That's how it's split up. It's actually pretty simple when you look at it that way. These Weather Service offices are the ones that give you your daily forecast, whether it's going to rain or not, that kind of thing. Then they have these specialty areas, National Hurricane Center forecasts tropical storms and hurricanes. Then we have the others, storm prediction, climate prediction, and that sort of thing. So that's how the Weather Service is organized. NORCOR works with them. One of the programs, the most visible one, is the Hurricane Hunters. This is a picture, this is over a hurricane at a much higher altitude. This is actually inside the eye of a hurricane. The forecast that comes out results in charts like this that the Weather Service puts together to forecast what is going to happen when this thing hits land. This P3 is filled with this kind of equipment where they can measure wind shear and temperature and velocity and that kind of thing. It's done very carefully, obviously. They don't put themselves in hazard. And so when they fly into the hurricane, they pick an angle where the wind is not coming at them, so it doesn't increase the chance of a problem. This is what it looks like. This is at 5,000 feet from the eye of a hurricane. I asked one of the guys one time, actually it was an Air Force officer that used to fly in hurricanes, but what happens, because the instruments are a blur, you can't really see what's going on very well. Aren't you concerned about losing control of the aircraft? And what do you do? He said, yeah, that happens, but when you feel like you've lost it, there's a technique for handling that. And what you do is you stall the airplane. What? Yes, you stall the airplane so that you won't put negative G's on the wings. Then after the aircraft is stalled, you do a normal stall recovery. You get the wings level again. And now you're flying. And the only problem is you have to decide whether or not you're upside down. I decided I didn't want to do that. The second Weather Service program that officers get involved with is snow survey. It started in North Dakota with the Red River of the North. That's this one here. It's very flat in North Dakota. When the water goes up not too many feet, it goes wide by many miles. And so the flooding was a real issue. And so this program was started to measure the amount of snow that was on the ground in order to predict spring snowmelt flooding. So typically in the field, if you want to get a measurement, you go out there with a ruler, pound it in the ground and see how deep the snow is. Then you take a sample and you melt it and you can see how dense the snow is and you can get an estimate of what the water content. But just like the lead line surveys, you just get a point. And the area of extent of the snow is much wider. So the technique that was developed to use in aircraft actually uses these photomultiplier tubes to measure gamma radiation. Gamma particles come off the ground, they bounce around inside this thing, come out the end, it's converted to a photon that can be counted by the computer. The aircraft carries it at 500 feet over a known distance of a flight line of about 10 miles and measure the background radiation. Then in the winter, when you fly over the snow, the water in the snow attenuates the gamma, and you can use calculation to see how much water must have been there in order to attenuate it that much. And so you end up with, and you can have these all over, so you end up with a much better measurement of the aerial extent of the water. Oops, wrong. Keep doing it. That's me, by the way. The computer is controlled from the cockpit. Currently, this program is spread out all over the United States and Canada. And it's used not only for snowmelt, spring flooding, but also to measure what reserves of water are in the snowpack, so they could expect how much will be available when it melts. Okay, we're off the Weather Service, and we're on to the Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, OAR. This is the research arm, and they maintain research laboratories in the Atlantic and the Pacific, and send out these oceanographic ships to do surveys. This is another picture of the researcher without the helicopter platform. So what kind of things do they do? I'll go through three types of research that's done. The first one is cores. This is a tube with a weight on the end of it that is lowered down from the ship, dropped really. It drills itself into the bottom, and then you pull it back up and you have a record of the sediment. This is a core here, and this is the crew getting it ready to go over the side. That's another picture of me back in the days when I had a beard. Another activity is called seismic reflection profiles. And it's similar to echo sounder, but the source is much, much louder. When it's used to be a stick of dynamite, and now they use compressed air. When this is running, you can hear it through the whole ship. The noise is bounced off the layers in the bottom and comes back up to these hydrophones and is recorded on a strip chart here. The third thing is, Nansen models was the original name. This is a way of collecting data on the water column itself. These tubes are open on both ends and they're lowered down. They measure salinity, temperature, and depth, and are wired such that when it gets to a particular depth, a certain depth, you can trigger this to close and actually get a water sample. And then you pull it back up. So we've got a couple pictures here. This is on the researcher of doing a cast, and the officer's job, that's me again, is to make sure that this cable stays straight up and down, because otherwise if it goes off too far, you're not going to get an accurate measurement. If it goes under the ship, you might snag it on something. And you would think that would be easy, right? Just goes up and down. No. The wind blows the ship and there are currents, and so you end up chasing the wire. And I just wanted to point out that it isn't all nice up there. This is a picture. We were coming back from the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and got caught in which really wasn't even a hurricane. It was just a low pressure area, but the waves were very large. And this is what you get when you pound into waves that size. The researcher had a bulbous bow with hydrophones in it, and the hydrophones were covered with a sheet of fiberglass that was about 1.5 inches thick. And when we came back, finally got in, pounding into those waves, it busted all the fiberglass out and ripped all the hydrophones out. That's how much damage was done. It was an expensive repair. The last group that I'm going to talk about is the National Environmental Satellite Data and Information Service. This has the minimum number of officers in it. And to be honest with you, other than they manage the environmental satellites, I can't tell you very much more about it. They do have one program that interacts with mariners. It's important. They manage these what are called EPIRBs, which stands for Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacon. What that means is the commercial ships, which are required to have them if they sink and the crew ends up in a lifeboat or a raft, these things go in the water, they're activated by salt water and send a signal to satellite, which relays it to a control center. And now they know, because they're numbered, they know what the ship is, where the ship is, and that they're in trouble. And depending on where, this is a worldwide thing, depending on where they are, they mobilize somebody basically to go out and get them. And so that's really the only program I know very much about. Then there's the officer training class. This is the 50th officer training class. It's now well over 100. This is how people come into the NOAA Corps. So in order to qualify, you need a 4-year science degree and an interview. And you have to interview well. There aren't very many positions that open up. And very well qualified people usually end up having to apply 2 or 3 times before they actually get in because there's a waiting list. That's me before I grew my beard. So that's the presentation. Are there any questions?
A very simple one. Since I crossed the Atlantic on a stormy sea, were you ever seasick? Because you had some bad weather too.
I think nobody ever is not seasick. Everybody is. And what happens is that you get used to it. Now there are some people that are, I remember one gal, she gets sick when the ship is tied to the dock. Literally. She just can't function. But usually what happens, if you're out after 3, 4, 5 days, everybody's pretty well okay.
Yeah.
And you have to be careful about turning your head and looking at the horizon when you start feeling it and what you eat. And of course there are some people that nothing bothers them. They can have a horrible hangover and eat anything they want and they don't have an issue. That's my take on that.
Is there any connection to the Omni transmission radio beams that are put out for aircraft navigation to this organization?
That's maintained, the VORs are maintained by the FAA. And I have, in my experience, have never seen NOS measure those things. I think they're very precisely located when they are put in. Now the issue with them is the magnetic north moves, and many of them were built so that they couldn't move. And so now they have errors that were built in, and the only way to adjust for it would be to go there with a very large crane, pick the whole thing up, rotate it the precise amount, and put it back down. I suspect that there's probably digital techniques to deal with that now. But to answer your question, no, it doesn't get involved in that. Yes, Stu?
Being a turtle fan, back to your one about the nets that let turtles loose. Do you know anything about how that works?
There are a couple of different techniques. The one that I remember that we were actually measuring had kind of a circuitous route in the very tail end of the net and a flap. And so the turtle could go through there and out through the flap, which would close back up. And the fish, and shrimp primarily, that was the one that was creating the issue, would stay in the net. The 2 biggest stocks, I guess, that are approached with that kind of net would be shrimp, of course, and the other one are croaker. And that's a kind of fish. They call them croaker because when you get them up in the net and you pick them up, they make noise. And it sounds like a croaking noise. And that's the primary component of cat food, as a matter of fact. That's all I remember.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yes, Patrick?
Where were you stationed mostly? What parts? It sounds like you were in lots of different places. But
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
I was assigned to the researcher, my first assignment. I should back up and say, I didn't go directly into the NOAA Corps. I initially went into the Coast Guard. So I spent 4 years in the Coast Guard, and I was on a buoy tender that in the Pacific, and after that I was assigned to Alaska. And then I transitioned to, we got time, so I'll tell you a story. Yeah, I transitioned to NOAA because I was working in communications branch in Juneau, which was kind of a fun job because I got to fly to all the remote locations and count the pages in the classified documents. But we maintained his communications, so we were maintaining the naval radio station on Kodiak Island. And they have transmitting stations and receiving stations that are 15 miles apart. And so these NOAA ships would come up and they would use radio teletypes, except they would use wideband frequencies. Nobody was using wideband frequencies except them. And so the chief that was in charge of the radio station would call me every time one of these things was up there and read me the riot act, because he had to jump in the Jeep and drive overland, climb up a tower, and move a couple things so that they could talk to these ships. So, you know, after listening to this for a few times, I thought, I gotta do something about this. So I looked it up and I saw that the ships were coming out of the Pacific Marine Center in Seattle. So I called down there to, talk to, the people. I told them, look, this is really an inconvenience for us. You're using antiquated equipment. I don't think, you're going to have to do something about this equipment, because I don't know if we can continue doing this. Took care of that. Well, the next morning, my boss comes out. He's been talking on the phone. He comes out. He has this real quizzical look on his face. He says, "Did you talk to somebody in NOAA?" I said, "Yeah, boss, I took care of that." I told him, they blah 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 blah. And he says, "Well, my boss just called me and said that we're going to take their message traffic. If they want to put it in a bottle and throw it over the side. So leave these guys alone." So at that point, I thought, well, this might be something I'm interested in. So I transitioned over to NOAA. But to go back to your original question, I spent a couple years on the researcher, then a couple years in headquarters. I was working in weather service, fishery service at that point, and helped manage the assignments of the guys who were out in the field. Then I got a pilot's license and went into that program.
Place names, though. What places?
Okay,
So where was the researcher?
Miami.
In Miami.
Right.
Okay.
And the office was in Silver Spring, Maryland. And
I lived there for a bit, so I'm familiar with that area. Yeah.
I lived in Gaithersburg, actually.
Oh,
when I was
yeah.
there. And the aircraft started out in Rockville and ended up being assigned to Minneapolis for the snow survey program. And I stayed there for a number of years. I guess I flew for 10 or 12 years. Then got transferred back to headquarters to work for NOS making charts. And that was in Rockville as well. So those are the places I went.
Kathy, did you have a question?
I do. I'm in the very beginning of your presentation, you showed all these maps, and then things got more detailed and more detailed. Is America, are we at the forefront of this as it started, or did you get information from Europe? How did all of this happen?
The CNGS and NOS make domestic charts. So they're responsible for charting the shorelines of the United States and its territories. So that would include places like Guam and Saipan and things like that. The international charts are handled by the country that has the shoreline. And so the Navy actually has a Naval Hydrographic Office, and they're responsible for getting charts for the Navy. And they do it primarily by buying the charts from the country that makes them. The NOAA or CNGS got involved with making charts during the war because we were going to places that A, had no chart to begin with, and B, if they had it, they wouldn't have given it to us. And so they, they got enlisted, to go over there and make the charts. The Navy has hydrographic ships, but they don't typically use them. They use them when they have a need.
Does every country do this?
I'm sorry?
Does every country do this? I mean, every geographical area.
And developed ones, yeah, to lesser or greater extent. Well, every country that has a shoreline.
Indonesia as
Not
well.
Monaco.
Yeah, probably not. Okay, well, thank you very much. I hope I didn't bore you.